far as conflict between politicians, we can't solve that problem entirely because people are separately elected, they have their own constituencies, and some people are what we call showboats. They just want to get attention in the media, and even under circumstances where people are suffering, they will say things, sometimes outrageous things. There can be an effort to, when a disaster occurs, if a very senior political leader tries to say, let's be together on this at least for a short while and not criticize each other. But in the end, it's hard to keep that going, and in the United States at least, it won't persist for very long. The second issue is I think one that you can deal with a little bit better, which is the credibility of experts versus political leaders. We had a negative example of that when right after 9/11 there were anthrax attacks through the U.S. mail. You may remember about that, and there were a number of people who died as a result of this. And although there's somebody who's been identified as the perpetrator who committed suicide, there still are people who doubt that the FBI has ever figured out who really did it. At the time when the first death occurred, our Secretary of Health and Human Services, the federal cabinet officer, spoke about it. He was an ex-governor of a U.S. state, basically a career politician who had been appointed to a cabinet position. And he said very straightforwardly, this was not terrorism, this was naturally occurring anthrax poisoning, and there was nothing to worry about. We are not under attack. That turned out to be totally wrong. It was an attack. And as a result of that, his credibility was completely destroyed, and he never was trotted out by the administration, the Bush administration, as a public spokesman on that issue again. The person who became the spokesperson was the head of our Centers for Disease Control, a physician, a career public health person. And even though there was huge uncertainty, and even though sometimes they said things that turned out to be proven wrong by events, at least nobody suspected that this woman, Dr. Gerberding, was doing it for political reasons. She was trusted because she had expert credentials. Another situation that in New York at roughly the same time, when in the week after 9/11, Mayor Giuliani had many press conferences, and you probably saw some of them on cable television. And he would always be standing up in front of the audience with about 5 or 6 people standing behind him. If you saw this on TV, you would remember. Who were those people? One was the governor of New York, a state, who rarely said anything, but he stood there silently sending the message that the city of New York and the state of New York are together on this issue. Here I am. Rudy's in charge. I stand behind him. Occasionally he said something, but that was a very important message. The other people were the police chief, the fire chief, the emergency management director, and occasionally the transportation commissioner and a few other people. They were there under some circumstances simply to say, we're the professionals and we back what the mayor is saying. But any time that there was something specific or technical to say, Giuliani would turn to his professional administrator, invite them up to the microphone, and have them speak. Because he wasn't credible to speak about police issues, but he was credible to speak about how people should feel. He was credible to say what decisions the government was taking. So he understood very well and protected his credibility by saying that. One last thing to say. No matter because there's so much confusion and uncertainty, it is bound to be the case that there are things that you don't know in the beginning that are going to turn out to be different than you said they were. 2 things. One is, in making a press statement, be very careful that you provide the source of the information. So say there is a nuclear plant. In the United States, many nuclear plants are owned by private utilities. Famously, in 1979, there was a radiation leak. Actually, we could even I'll talk about current stuff. The Obama administration got information from BP that has turned out to be wrong. I'd have to go back and look at the press conferences. I hope that the administration was saying BP tells us that this is true. If they said, here's what the situation is, and didn't attribute it to BP, they own that statement. And if it turns out to be wrong, there's no going back on it. If you're giving information that you've gotten from another source, especially a self-interested source, as BP was, here's what BP tells us. We're monitoring this information carefully. We are seeking confirmation of it from other sources. We will keep you up to date, but this is the best that we know now. So there are ways of protecting yourself from being caught and giving bad information by other people. And then finally, you just have to depend on your reputation for credibility. If you make a mistake or say something that's wrong, if you've established a reputation for it and you said, I gave wrong information, here's the reason it was wrong, now I'm giving you the right information, you may be able to recover your credibility. But if you don't have that kind of credibility, or if it's an issue on which you have no professional standing, as the Secretary of Health and Human Services didn't on anthrax, then you're cooked. And in a crisis, if your credibility disappears or is weakened, there's no way to get it back in the short run, and there may be no way to get it back ever. So you really have to protect that as a crucial resource, especially if you're among the most senior leaders of the country or the province or the city.
I would just add to that, a recent example in the United States that was positive was the state of Texas's response to H1N1, which in the U.S., H1N1 emerged in Texas, and there was a huge amount of uncertainty about the lethality of the disease at the time. But the governor, like Arn was saying, in relation to 9/11, brought together all his technical experts and turned over, during the press conferences, the opportunity for them to address the issue and to stress repeatedly that there is a high degree of uncertainty. We don't know X, Y, and Z, but we do know this, and we're investigating that. And actually online, the governor's office for the state of Texas has those press conferences still posted, and I think are some of the better examples of recent responses in public communication in the U.S.